Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
The reason I did that, had these others stand up, is let you see that if you hang around this thing as long as they have, that you ain't going to amount to a damn thing. Now, I don't know how long this thing will work, but JP and old Skinny can tell you that they know it works over 33 years. Now, my mother, come August the 17th, she'll have 90 years of continuous sobriety. She never says anything about it. Whatchamacall up here, I'm going to get around to him. But thinking of something to say to introduce old Joe reminds me of a story. And any similarity between this story and our speaker is strictly coincidental. I was out in Oklahoma here several months ago in the Indian Territory, and I ran across a friend of mine out there that's part Indian. And he's telling me about the men from Washington being there to visit the tribe, and they had been to see the chief of the tribe. And they began to promise a lot of things which the Indians are very familiar with promises. And they told this Indian, said, now right across over here in front of you, said, we're going to build a university for your people. And the old chief says, Hoya. And said, right next to it, says, we're going to build an elementary school and a high school for your people. And the chief says, Hoya. And says, right adjacent to where you are, we're going to put in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And to that, the chief said, Hoya. And these men went on and elaborated on some other things they were going to do, and to each, why the chief said, Hoya. So they turned to leave, and they got part of the way at the door, and the spokesman for the crowd turned around and said, by the way, said, I understand you have some real prize Angus bulls here. If it's all right with you, we'd like to go out and inspect your bulls, your herd. And the chief says, okay, but don't step in the Hoya. Now, if any of you's mind in the gutter, there's a lady here today who told me that the Hoya is a plant. Oh, thinking of something to say about old Joe, or to introduce Joe, I know there are no big shots in AA. At least I've been told that. I don't believe it. But there really are no big shots. But every now and then there are certain people that stand head and shoulders above certain other people. And basically it's because of what they are and the example that they set and what they stand for. And you know how these people have been able to achieve this. It's by the action that is in our book of experience. And Joe is one of these fellows. Joe is a real student of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And most importantly, Joe applies our steps to his daily life. Therefore, he is what he is today as a result of this. Our big book of experience tells me that nothing ensures sobriety so much as working with other alcoholics. This works when all else fails. Joe is a good example of that. Joe works with a lot of drunks. Joe loves a drunk. He's a good AA, and he'll help a drunk. Joe is from Tyler, Texas, and Tyler is known as the Rose City. So I want you to help me make welcome the Tyler Rose, Joe L. from Tyler, Texas. Joe?
My name's Joe, and I'm an alcoholic. And we were running pretty well on schedule for a while there. I can't let Franklin get away without telling this one. Years ago, when I was a kid, my father used to raise pigs out at the edge of town, and when he'd come home from work, he'd take the food out to feed the pigs. And one day, as he was loading these vegetables over the fence to these pigs, there came along an expert and said to my father, if you would cook those vegetables before you give them to the pigs, they could digest them in half the time. And my father looked at him and said, what is time to a hog? That's good. I don't know, really. I've had such a ball since I come here. You new people, if this is your first conference, you need to watch it very closely and see how they put one on. They end up looking like a Chinese fire drill sometimes. We are not organized by God in any sense of the word. And we're just not. And I appreciate the recognition for the old people here tonight, because I'm an old man around AA. You can tell by looking at me I've been somewhere a long time. And you know, in the animal world, and I'm at the expense of sounding intellectual presently, the submarinial animals like the mink and the otter and the muskrat, if you know the habits of these animals when they have their young, if you panic one of them, they will eat their young. You knew that. And in AA, if they panic, they'll eat the old ones. Okay. So I have to agree with what he said about getting old in AA. If you're coming to AA to make any marks, forget it. When I was a new man in AA one night, I picked up the cups and started washing them like I thought every good AA member ought to do. And an old member came and put his arm around me, and he said, "Young man, I like your attitude. You're going a long way in AA." 25 years later, I picked up the same dirty cups and started washing them, and a new man was heard to say, "Look at the old bastard, he's still trying to run this outfit." So you can't win under any conditions, but I'll take credit for being an old man, old AA member. And thank God I can be an old AA member. If I'd have quit while I was a young one, I'd have been gone a long time ago. So I'm here tonight because I'm an old AA member. That's as simple as I can put it. I don't know what to talk about tonight. I heard Tom last night, and you have so much in store for you in the morning. I like to tell a few things I like about Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the greatest enlightening things when I came to AA was when I found out how it got started. I was amazed to find out that it was not contrived by some visionary or by some do-gooder or by anybody that had made a study of us. I was amazed to find out that AA was started by two fellers who couldn't drink any better than I could. And I liked that right off. And that made it kind of like me when I got here. So, I don't know. I've been here so long. AA's kind of changed its face since I got here. Looking at this exceedingly fashionable-looking group here, you don't look like the folks I saw when I came here before. And we talk now in a strange language, you know, when we come to AA, not like we used to talk about. And they tell me that the stigma on alcoholism has nearly gone away. Don't you believe it? I have a nephew in Dallas that's a psychiatrist, and then I got another nephew in San Francisco that's a homosexual. And do you know my people brag on them more than they do on me, and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody wants to get in on the act now. I've just come from the West Coast where they're casting some new soap operas out there, and they're writing script now for alcoholics. And we just replaced 2 homosexuals and 1 bad ovary on the soap opera out there. And this is a strange illness. You hear a lot of strange terms when you come in here. And the newcomers immediately award themselves a doctor's degree when they get here and start talking in some pseudo-fashionable language. And you hear them stand behind the podium and use such statements as constitutionally predisposed. You ever heard that, Tom? Are environmentally disillusioned. Are penetrating analysis. You hear that crap? Let me tell you one I got to tell you one about the lady that went to see the psychiatrist. For a long, long time, she did. And one day she said to him, "Doctor, today I want you to tell me just exactly what you think about me." And he read back and took a little time to deliberate, and he looked at her and said, "All of my evidence that I've gathered about you points to the fact that you're crazy." And she was real upset at this. It made her mad, and she said, said, "I want a second opinion." And he looked at her and said, "You ugly, too." So, I don't know. You hear a lot of strange things, a lot of language that we didn't used to hear when he and I came to AA. Talk now about, you hear words like detoxify. We used to puke a whole lot, and that's a dirty trick to play on a drunk, to detoxify him. Did you know that these people who are involved in all this, that if you lay the human body upon this table that has alcohol in it and just leave it laying there, it'll detoxify itself. And the sweep-up proposition they got in some of the cities up in your town up there, all they're doing is rushing him, and he's sucked in to detoxify. He's back out on the street to get drunk, and they're running him so fast that he'll die of exhaustion before he ever gets to AA. Then they use a lot of other language. I went to a psychiatrist myself, and he told me, he said, "You got a alcoholic syndrome." And I used to think a syndrome was a cat house where they competed. I didn't know that. And Lord God, they you know, and then you get to wondering who's an alcoholic. I have people out in the normal world ask me every now and then, what's the difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic? And it's hard to answer. I do not have a good clinical description for an alcoholic. And I tell them that I believe that alcoholics drink more than non-alcoholics. That's about all there is. But I don't know, and this is one of the beauties of our society. We leave that up to you to say whether or not you're going to be one of us. Now, years ago, General Service, they had a little pamphlet. I think it's still floating around. They had called 44 questions. And they were little old innocuous questions about, did your wife give you that look today? Or some such. Did you fall off of the sofa? And they were questions that I could read, and they didn't leave me impressed. Now, I have contrived some questions here that I don't think it'll take 44 of them. Have you ever had the roof of your mouth sunburned? Have you ever had malfunction of the zipper? He did. They used to call me Rusty. Have you ever been arrested while in jail? Have you ever been run over by your own car while driving? Have you ever woke up in bed with a circus midget? Did you hear about that midget that got thrown out of the nudist colony? He was going around getting his nose in everybody's business. Have you ever been caught in your own burglar alarm? This is the one, I think, that'll separate the men from the boys. Have you ever woke up in the morning feeling rather delicately and lose your glasses and wash your teeth with preparation H? That'll give you a pucker. I think we got some folks here tonight that affiliate with us here. I think from the resounding reception that this has gotten. But a more treasure than that is the ability for us to laugh. And I think it's the greatest medicine that an alcoholic can have. Our founder, Bill, in the chapter 4 of the book says, why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered. And that's enough of an excuse. And I want to laugh as much as I can, because I think that all of us cried on the pillow enough. Now, this is a strange illness. You can tell by some of the people here. The preacher was... It's the only disease known to mankind where the newcomer apologizes for not having it longer when he gets here. Is that right? You know? Yeah. And we're not too smart. Now, every now and then you'll hear somebody get up and get carried away and talk about the keen alcoholic mind. Now, the only place you'll hear that discussed is in AA. I've never been to a seminar of any sort discussing the keen alcoholic mind. I think we're a little bit stupid. We're the folks that get up every morning and expect a different result out of the same activity. Don't we? Repetitively get up every morning and say to ourselves with great vigor, today it'll be different. And it ain't. And for years it ain't different. And you wake up in the morning and do this. I really don't have a good description for an alcoholic who could qualify for it. Maybe I can tell you what an alcoholic is not. We'll go in the back door and see if we can prove it. Not too long ago, I was going out to Las Vegas to hold services. And there was a gentleman, an impeccably dressed gentleman. He reeked of affluence. He got on a plane, sat with me, and I was in the window and hemmed in. And he did a thing that I want to tell you what he did. When the stewardess started hustling the booze, he ordered one of those big double frosted things. Oh, God, aren't they beautiful? The little tinkling droplets off of it like that, you know, they're still beautiful to me. And then he took that drink and he did a thing that was beyond any description. He set it on his tray and began to read. And he likes to have driven me out of my mind. Drink it, for God's sake, I said. And he sat there and sipped on that drink and read. And when the stewardess picked up that glass to serve dinner, part of that drink was still in it. Now, the difference is this. The stewardess said to me, Mr. Leath, would you like to have a drink? And I said, no, ma'am, I've got to be home in February. And she said, I don't understand. I said, you never will. You never will. I cannot explain the enigma of a man like me, who in the face of all the expert knowledge will repetitively get up every morning and set out to destroy himself. I cannot explain me with regards to alcoholism. I can never explain me. The only thing that I know something about is the recovery program from such an incident. What causes it, I do not know. The little doctor in the chapter in our book says that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. That's too simple for us. You know, those damn psychiatrists just had me convinced that I drank because my mama put me on the pot backwards. But the book tells us men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Then it says in there, he talked about it last evening, it says, after a time, you know, that's kind of like your book says, and it came to pass, you know. And I sure am glad it came to pass. I'm glad it didn't come to stay, I'll tell you that for sure. After a time, it says, don't say how long, he cannot differentiate the true from the false. And then the third sentence says, he thinks that he's leading a perfectly normal life. So when you talk to the newcomer, he neither knows how he feels or what caused it, and you cannot expect any results from the use of logic in AA. So I took a drink because I wanted to find out what the effects were. I took my first drink when I was 17 to be one of the boys, and I used to use the term innocently enough, but I took it that night. And every drink that I subsequently took until the last day, till the day I died, meant something to me. And I think that that's the story of alcoholism. That the alcoholic, now there were 6 other fellows in this group that night who drank with me, and I know them all presently, the ones that are still alive, and they remain in that realm of, that nebulous realm that we talk about in AA, social drinking. I have a very humble opinion about social drinking, and that is that if you take the most pious and unctuous old sister out of his church and slap about 8 slugs of that gallow in her, she's going to become unsocial as hell, I'll tell you that. Now, these other 6 chaps, the drink didn't mean anything to them. Did to me. It meant a great deal to me. And I began, as I look back on it, I began to use alcohol, and it was an answer for a long time before it was a problem. And I found, I said to myself, where have they kept this delightful elixir all of this time? Why haven't I found it earlier? I was 17, if you please. But I went back to it, and it offered me the great exhilaration, if you please. And I just knew that it did something for me. It removed all of my inhibitions. It brought me away from the wall, made me the life of the party, where I had stood and stuttered and been a nobody. It made a somebody out of me. Alcohol did. And I came to the top of the water, boy, I'll tell you. And pretty soon, I'm an East Texas clod from down in Tyler. And Tom similarly talked about it last night. Pretty soon, Tyler got too small for me. And I knew that if I were somewhere else, that my true genius would be accepted better than when this little hick town, Tyler. By the way, he told you I came from Tyler. Nobody ever goes to Tyler intentionally. Our population is made up of people who have been stranded there at one time or another. And I left. And of all places for an East Texas clod to end up, I ended up in Hollywood, California. And the selection for my profession, a kind Jewish fellow took me under his wing and let me be an understudy to him, and he was one of the more eminent designers of ladies' lingerie. Now, this is a very pleasurable occupation. Can you imagine an East Texas clod to be thrown into the hurly-burly life of Hollywood and Beverly Hills? And my mother used to describe it better than anybody I've ever heard. She said in later days, I think it was too much for him. Now, in the lingerie business is where you got these soft, silk, sleazy intimate things that the ladies wear. And it's fun. You have models to work with 8 hours a day, and if you're lucky, a few hours at night. Now, we've got a step in Alcoholics Anonymous called the second step, and I suspect it's the greatest enlightenment we have. It's the one that infers that you might have a gopher in the garden, you know. If you cut a bunch of braziers with 3 of those places in them, you're nuts. I later told a psychiatrist about that, and he said it was just wishful thinking. Needless to say, even after I had arrived at a modicum of success in this business and had been pronounced as a young newcomer to the profession that would go far, I did. I drank myself out of that first golden opportunity that I had. Now, to the average person in this audience tonight, that doesn't mean a great deal. But to the drunk that has had the humiliation of being blown out of the saddle out of the only thing that he's ever done, that he had set great store by, it is the beginning of a long and tedious journey that we alcoholics seem to follow in the process of our alcoholism. And this fellow, this Jewish fellow, he was a sort of a weird guy. He came in one day, and he said to me, "Joe, you can't drink." And you know what that means to a drunk. I cannot stand that word, and I don't think many more alcoholics can stand that word. Don't you do that. We just can't live with it. I was up in Illinois not so long ago delivering a lecture on demon rum in the University of Illinois, and I had to do it in a big lunchroom. And I had to stand and look at a sign hanging on the wall over there, and this sign read, "Don't take the dishes out of this room." And I'd talk a little while, and I'd look over there and see that, "Don't take these dishes out of that room." And I'm going to report to you, I got 2 of them damn dishes in my den at home. They have no collectible value whatsoever, but they told me, "Don't do that." And a drunk can't stand it. Don't you do it. And that old boy with a little booze at him, he'll say, "I'll show you." And I showed him that I could not drink by drinking. And he came one morning as weird as ever, and he said, "Good morning to you." "Good morning." "You're fired." Just like that. And he had a hell of a whimsical sense about him. He said, "You know, there's some good comes out of everything. The way you handle those scissors," he said, "if you'd have been a rabbi, you would have destroyed our whole race." You got to let that roll around a little. You know, this is the beginning. This is the beginning, and those of you who have become, shall we say, engrossed with beverage alcohol know what I'm talking about. This is the beginning of the humiliation and the indignities that we heap upon ourselves repetitively. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could tell folks why it was happening? But we can't. And this is the beginning of a little thing that we dwell upon in the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous called self-pity. And we sit and cry and try to answer the question that we never find an answer for. And we say, why doesn't it happen to him or to him or to him? Why does it always seem to happen to me? And then we wallow in the self-pity of that. I went north. Have any of you ever heard the plaintive cry? The wife, the dear Al-Anon, have you ever heard this cry? Honey, let's move somewhere else where we don't know anybody and start all over again. I would love to say to you that I have just retired from my 5th profession. And I've got to be honest in our program and tell you that every one of them, I was a fraud when I went into it. But alcohol made me move very often, you know that. Keep a moving. This has been the treatment for alcoholism until the advent of Alcoholics Anonymous by the families, by the friends, by the medical profession, by everybody at hand. Keep him moving like that. And no family likes to admit they got one of us yet. It ain't become bridge table gossip yet. One of the girls says, "What's that noise I hear in the back room?" "Oh, that's my son. He's an alcoholic, you know." Bullshit. They have not exceeded that. And we move, and we move, and we move. And the only thing wrong with the theory of moving an alcoholic from place A to place B is that when you get there, he's there too. This is the only flaw in moving us. And we just as rotten moving as we are sitting still. I get a kick out of these fellows that brag about all the bad things that happened to them. When I left left Los Angeles and moved to Sacramento, I was run over by the welcome wagon. And you can't get it no worse than that, you know that. Then they stand up here and talk about, you know, the sad things that have befell them. And some feller told me the other day, said he'd been arrested for driving while drinking. And I've been arrested for walking while drinking. I've been arrested for laying down while drinking. I've been arrested for canoeing while drinking. I have been arrested up in the tree while drinking. I've been arrested for drinking, for the same thing over and over again. And I suspect that this illness of ours, the repetitiveness of it becomes very wearing on us. And the drunk draws further and further into a shell. And when we say he cannot differentiate the true from the false, how true it is in retrospect. I got to tell you a little story. If I don't, they won't put me on the plane tomorrow. And this has to do with the alcoholic being completely oblivious to what goes on around him. Nothing means anything to him except that drink. Years ago, I lived in a little town called Goose Creek, Texas, and my wife had to go up into Illinois to watch her sister have a baby. And while she was gone, I got fired, which was not new to us. And the process of events in those days was when I got fired, I know none of you folks have ever done this, was to go home to Mama. No matter where I got fired from, I always went home to Mama. Mama had a good purse, and she had a good place to get started from. And I was going to Mama 20 years later, you know. And that's been my history. But I started to go home to Mama. It's 300 miles. Mary and I, those of you who know Mary, and we've always had cats. And I had 2 cats, and I knew that I dare not come home without them. I just knew that. So this night, I loaded those 2 cats in the back of a little 2-seated automobile on a mattress, and I started towards Tyler, which is some 300 miles, and I had to go through the outskirts of Houston. And as I got close to the edge of Houston, I saw one of those delightful arrows that point down to a liquor store. And as I approached it, there was a sign there that said, 3 pints for the price of 2. And not being one to ever pass up a bargain, I bought the 3 pints and started for Tyler. And it was a cool night, beautiful night, just nippish, you know. And after a few drinks of that, God was in his heaven. And
everything was all right, and the car ran better, and I sang to myself, you know, a little, "Oh, promise me." And I stopped in a little town called Cleveland, Texas, to get a chaser for one of the jugs. And when I came back, one of the damn cats got out of the car. And I knew I didn't dare go home without them, so I chased them all over this little town. It was raining pretty heavy by this time. It was a stinking, nasty mess, muddy. And I finally caught the cat up under a cotton gin, and I held him by one of his hind legs, and I whipped him all the way back to the car, releasing my hostilities. And he did a thing on that back seat that wasn't nice. It was a sort of a Picasso study in brown. And do you think it bothered me? I closed the windows and turned the heater up a little bit and drove north. What else? Sang some more, took another honk on the jug, and was completely oblivious to my surroundings. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I threw up in the front seat. And it hurts me now to think about it even. And I never even, as Tom says, shifted gears. I just kept right on going after I threw up in the front seat. And at daylight, I drove into a little town, had one main street, 2 lights, and I parked under one of the lights to take a little pop at my breakfast. And there was a town clown there, a deputy sheriff of sorts, I guess, and it had been a long time since he'd had an opportunity to arrest anybody. And he came racing out to this automobile and beat on the glass, and he said to me, "Let that window down." I get it down here, you know, like this. And he shot his head in the car, and he said, "What do you think you're, oh, my God." And he slowly walked away. So I would say to you that's a drunk that comes to our society, are we being evicted? Please put your arm around him and not expect him to know the true from the false. He's completely oblivious to the things that go on around him. I went to work for the railroad in Northern California, and I'd love to say here that they're the most narrow-minded group of people I've ever met. I think that I eat breakfast every day with a lawyer, corporate lawyer, who represents the railroads, and he says about railroad people that they're the highest-paid bunch of ignorant sons of bitches he's ever had anything to do with. But I went to work for him and had to prove that I was a great asset to their company. Here's the famous fellow who has never picked up anything heavier than a pair of scissors, making his third poppet industry. Now, they have that rule about drinking, and I guess they have it for a very good reason, that they run more than one train on a track. And I never have quite understood that yet. I don't know how they do that, one train on a track, but I knew that one day something would happen to me. I lived in constant fright. I shook a lot of the time, and I was waiting for it to happen, and they did it. We had an interlocking system on the railroad, and up at the top of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And this was where you cut the helper engines off of these trains and did it real quick like. There was a lot of signals. Any railroad man here, you'll understand this vernacular. And the railroad made the mistake of hanging a bulletin in their depot saying this, per se, just like that sign on the wall. They said, It is physically impossible to make a mistake in that interlocking system. What were they saying to me? They were saying, you can't make a mistake up there, they said to me. And that sign bothered me. It worried me. I'd see it at night when I sleep, this sign hanging on the depot. You can't make a mistake in this interlocking system. The Sperry Company had made it. It was an electronically perfect system, they said. And I did. One night, I got two engines going towards one another. Between them were cars of apples, carrots, lettuce, and celery. And I made the biggest Waldorf salad that's ever been. And they wanted to fire me for that. And railroads are kind of like the government. They're probably 18% efficient when they're working real good. And they have investigations. And I had an alcoholic to represent me at the investigation, and we proved the thing about 1,000,000 to 1, that there had been a Mexican track walker walking that night swinging a lantern in his hand, and I had mistaken his lantern for a signal. They never did find the Mexican, the car. And they gave me 60 days. And here is the non-alcoholic looking at us. The old superintendent came out of that investigation, and he was livid with rage. He knew that he had been had by a drunk, and he was absolutely apoplectic. And he said to me, you ought to be arrested for even walking on our right-of-way. And then he said some words to me that I suspect that our dear Al-Anons have said to their husbands at one time or another. He said, I'll get you if it's the last thing I ever do. And let me tell you, this is one of the greatest misconceptions of mankind. You don't have to get even with an alcoholic. You do not have to get even with the drunk. He's got a mechanism within him that if you'll leave him to his own devices, he'll ultimately get even with himself. And there is nothing that you can call him. There is no ridicule that you can heap upon him that he has not called himself while crying on the pillow at night. So you're wasting your time to chide the drunk. Very definitely wasting your time to chide the drunk. Because he cannot differentiate the true from the false. Cannot. Believe me, he cannot. He does not know his true condition. Wouldn't it be nice if we had an answer to what's happening to us? But we can't talk the folks' language, the non-people's language. We have it all within us, and we got to carry it. And we can't even say the things that we feel like. We have to stay silent and die. You know, we can't be honest with other people. What if somebody come up to you and said, "Good morning, Joe. How do you feel this morning?" "Oh, I feel like the back of my head just blew out." "Good morning, Joe. How do you feel?" "Just trapped in the pants this morning." Keep her in here. And I suspect that the therapy of Alcoholics Anonymous that let me say a word was the greatest healing device that's known to mankind. When I came to AA, and they said, "Sit down over there and tell us about it." And this was the first chance I got to expel the poison that I had to drag with me for so many years. And I suspect this is the greatest healing therapeutic thing that's in our society, is to let the drunk talk. Let him talk, for God's sake. He's cried it and held it and lived with it, and he can't even describe it to himself. For God's sake, let him talk. Well, I got down, got down physically. I had gotten on wine quite by accident. That sounds good, doesn't it? But I had gotten on it, and with all of the shame that I had encountered up until this time, there was something even more shameful about drinking wine, or at least there was in those days in California. I had never heard the word alcoholic, but believe you me, I had heard the word wino. Believe you me, I had heard it. And with every drink I took, I felt a little bit different. Now, people make fun of wine, but it has some great medicinal purposes, wine does. It'll cure hay fever. If you drink it like I do, you ain't going to sneeze. I'll tell you that for sure. Them doctors been looking for a cure for hay fever for years. We've been sitting on it and didn't know how to capitalize on the damn thing. You know that. Don't get me started on them doctors. I'm in bad shape with them. They're the most least informed facet of our society. But if you don't believe that, read the newspapers. Every 2 weeks, some wise doctor comes out with something about alcoholism. Don't you read them, Tom? The last one I read was by Dr. Murgatroyd Ginsburg up in the Wisconsin University, and this was the theme of what he said. He said that he believed that alcoholics ought to prove their ability to drink, and that you would issue them a license to drink, and if they abused their privileges, take their license away. That came out 2 weeks ago in the Omaha Journal. Now, if you think they've learned anything, they're the least informed facet of our society. If you want to find out something about alcoholism, for God's sake, go see a cab driver. I got out and they shipped me to a railroad hospital. They had to take me. I'd been representing the union, and they couldn't throw me out. And this is before the days of the great literature that we've had. This is before they called us alcoholics. And they shipped me to the big railroad hospital in San Francisco and put me in the nervous ward out there. God damn, I qualified. Have you ever gone to a proctologist with a hangover? Oh, that feller had a gorgeous finger. I think he used to hang from it at night, you know. And they put me through one of the most stringent clinics on the West Coast, from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. And the result of this, nothing organically wrong with me. How about that? Well, a hospital has to have an answer for everything. They couldn't say he's just in here for the winter. And that was my introduction to psychiatry. And I should stop here, but I won't. This was my introduction to psychiatry, and they sent in this frustrated piano tuner, and he'd beat on my knees with that rubber mallet and asked me a lot of silly questions, and I gave him a lot of brilliant answers. If he's not a rummy now, it's not my fault, I'll tell you. Ask you little old personal, nasty questions about yourself. One of them, he asked me, did you ever suck your thumb? And I remember how pale he got when I graphically described to him that I still do. And I made him sit there and listen to me tell about going off in the corner and taking a quick pull at it. You know, I like that. Now, if you should ever want to, if the occasion ever arises, if you should ever want to get rid of a psychiatrist, they're pretty hard to get rid of. The best way to get rid of them is to run out of money. But You let two drunks lay up in bed one night and memorize the same dream to tell him the next morning. That'll turn him pale. And I begin to lose confidence in him. He had a fetish, this psychiatrist did, about people chewing their fingernails. And every morning when he'd come by, he'd make me hold out my hand to see if I'd chewed my fingernails. And they were always delicately manicured, real pretty. Now, this is the same psychiatrist that had had all of my teeth taken out. I don't know what he think I would chew my fingernails with. Maybe let one of the other patients chew on them for a little while. Hold your hands out, he'd say to me. I kind of lost faith in them fellers there. And he did. And they ran me out of California. I used to say, to make it sound fashionable and nice, that I left California a thoroughly discredited man. That sounds good. But the fact is, they ran me out. When I came to AA, I remember that damn psychiatrist, Tom, he asked me one time, he said, did you ever feel unwanted? And when I came to AA, I was wanted in 2 states and not wanted in 46 others, you know that. Now, maybe the fun is over. Maybe we can look at ourselves for what we are. I got back, came home to Mama again 20 years later. Here's the sharp cat from Hollywood and Beverly Hills, the big dog, the resourceful man, walking back some 20 years later to the little town in Tyler, Texas. And this was an absolute reversal of the story about the prodigal son. You've read it, no doubt. They saw him coming from afar and threw his butt in jail. My own mother had me locked up down there. This is the great humiliation. It was particularly cutting to a man of my high stature, a man of great integrity and perspicacity, me, a man who had made his mark, they said, and they had no more respect for me than to throw me in that stinking, hot, dirty, smelly, unair-conditioned jail down there. Here I was, still with no why. Didn't have me a why, couldn't find one. Why has it got to happen to me? And I suspect if a soul ever bitterly hated, you're looking at him. But now we've changed the tune. On a Monday morning, and I don't know how long I had been up there, I had been on a steady diet of Gallo wine and phenobarbital and letting them run concurrently. And to say the least, you're a little bit addled. But I was beginning to thaw out a little bit, and this fellow showed up in front of my cell door on a Monday morning. And he stood there and gave me what we have come to know is the AA pitch. He stood there and told me all about what had happened to him. If he'd have talked about me, I'd have had all the answers, but he double-crossed me. Just talked about himself. And I could not tell you today any of the profundities that he dropped upon me. I remember and shall remember until the day I die how still he stood. Just stood so still. And I wanted to stand still, and I couldn't. I'm a jumper. No, I'm not either. I'm a leaper. You ever seen the picture of the fellow with the top hat in the Cosmopolitan magazine who's carrying his bride across the threshold? I used to do that to people on the street. Leap up in their arms, you know. A pure nut. And this guy stood there. And he stood so still, and I wanted to say, God damn it, move a little bit. Please move and jump in tune with me. And he stood still. And I think that was what brought me ultimately to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a great misconception about our society, and it was read here tonight. You hear uninformed speakers get up here and talk about the tradition of anonymity, if you please. And it's the most misquoted, misunderstood thing. If you will read it again, it says our public relations policy is based upon attraction rather than promotion. This is the way we deal with the public and people who are not alcoholics. AA does not work on attraction rather than promotion. Our staying alive policy, if you please, is encompassed in the first paragraph of Chapter 7 in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and I shall read it to you. Practical experience shows us that the surest immunity against drinking is extensive work with other alcoholics. This works when all other activities fail. When your prayer group blows it, when your transcendental meditation group blows it, when your sitting and touching group blows it, this works when all other activities fail. It says in Chapter 7 of our book. Then we have the command, one of the only two in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It must be. It's followed by an exclamation mark, if you please. It says, unequivocally, carry this message to the other alcoholics. How are you going to screw that one up? One of the greatest misconceptions of the public is that why we do what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't go to see the drunk because he's a drunk. We don't know what he is. We go to see the drunk because we're an alcoholic. Believe me. And our co-founder, Bill, furnished us with the motivation in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel 44 years ago about now, when he said, suddenly I discovered that I needed him more than he needed me. And this is the lifeblood of our society. And this cat that came to see me, if you don't remember another word that I say here tonight, remember this word. He came unsolicited. If you dingbats had waited for me to call you, I'd have had to die. Why, you're the most uninteresting looking bunch of coffee drinking, cake eating people I've ever seen, and I would have not been able to master this bloated ego to call you. And you're looking at a man who's sober and standing here tonight because a guy came who had read that paragraph and adopted it to his way of life. And I suspect he needed to do what he did. After he got through with his pitch, it was as though he had finished an hour by the time clock. He was as unconcerned as a man can be, and he looked over his shoulder when he saw he wasn't getting anywhere, and he said to me, as he gave me a little pamphlet, if you ever need us, call us. And with that he went. And I suspect that if somebody had encountered that man out on the street as he left that jail that day, he would have said to them, no go. He's a smart ass. He would have said, no go. And our founder, Bill, said in a letter one time he suspected that it was physically or mentally impossible for one of ourselves to undress ourselves in front of another one with regards to our experiences and have it be a forgotten thing. And I'm here to prove that to be a fact. For the next 5 months, the picture of that man standing there, I could not erase from my memory. Why did he come? No gimmick there. Please tell me why he come, I said to myself. Well, my people are fine, substantial citizens down there, and they believe in what society has done, and they hired 2 deputy sheriffs to load me into a police car and take me to Houston, Texas, and sit with me until the train went west. This was their treatment for alcoholism. Keep him moving, keep him moving, keep him moving. And I remember that. Remember the humiliation of sitting in that station. I knew I smelled like Lysol. You got to do that a couple of times, I think, before you really know how Lysol smells. And I'm sitting there, ain't got a tooth in my head, got an old pair of pants with an elastic belt that has lost its elasticity, and I walk holding my pants up, and I know how I look. And it seemed to me that every person that walked by took a look at me. I don't know what your suffering has been in your progress through drinking, but mine has been in the humiliation and the indignities that I heaped upon myself and didn't have no why. And I'll never forget them 2 burly fuzzies on either side of me and me sitting there, helpless, totally helpless. And that night they helped me out onto a train and found me a seat. It's not a quick way to make friends on a train, I'll tell you that. They carried me off of that train in Los Angeles in a wheelchair. I had kind of set up shop in one of the toilets, and some smart guy said, we got to use this car. It goes both ways. You can't live in here. And when I got up to walk, I couldn't. And they loaded me in 3 bags on a wheelchair, and those of you who remember the old station in Los Angeles took me out to the front foyer and very, very unceremoniously dumped me. And with all of the jocular remarks that I might make, with all the levity, I could honestly say to you I went through the next 5 months of living hell. And I drank as few people have and lived to talk about it. We ended up in a flop house in Sacramento. And it was an existence that I won't even bore you with. You don't talk about it. It was an existence you do not talk about. He'd given me this little pamphlet that was written in the South. Wasn't any deluge of literature in those days, and this pamphlet had been written by 2 losers, by a doctor who died drunk and a pillhead that I saw the other day flapping around on his ankles. And the front of this pamphlet read, "Slaves of drink find peace of mind." I never read it, didn't have the courage to. And in my maudlin state, coming to and fro in this flop, it seemed to me that every time I opened one of those bags, that damn pamphlet was on top. Slaves of drink. And I'd see that man standing there still. And I wanted to be still so much. And I couldn't do it. And one night, I punched my ticket into the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, very simple, God help me. That's our ticket. It's not a matter of brilliance or keen perception. our worthiness, our who's who. It's a matter of sheer desperation. And I think that if you can get any old drunk like me to say, God help me, he's got a lot going for him. I believe it's very sincerely, because I'm looking into what's happened here. I'd love to say to the little visitor we have tonight, this didn't just happen here. And I walked back to Texas to find the man that had given me that damn pamphlet. I walked 2,600 miles, and I did it the hard way, with a jail here and a bridge there. And I got back to Tyler, Texas, and found this cat, and his story was the same. Can you imagine having a sad, dramatic story like that blown out from under you? When I was in AA for 3 months, I discovered that there was an AA club 3 blocks from that damn flop house. I could have walked 3 blocks and done it. But I walked 2,600 miles. I'm not a student of the keen alcoholic mind group, I'll tell you. And he took me to my first AA meeting. Oh, God, that was a thing to see. We'll go pretty soon, but I got to laugh a little bit about a new alcoholic's recovery. It is absolutely something to see. Have you ever seen one like me? I got well in 2 weeks. Knew all there was to know about it. And I quit cussing. And just beautiful man I was, really. And you might say I even became godlike. Have you ever seen any AA members who are godlike? Them fellers that make a 3-syllable word out of God. And I got a call one night to go see a drunk who had been lodged in the bar room. The bartender had taken his jug away from him, and all he really wanted was to get his jug back, but I couldn't see that. I was so godlike. I retrieved his jug, and I put him in the front seat of a nice new car that I had between another alcoholic and me, and I drove slowly and began to give him the pitch. And as I talked with sheer eloquence and piosity, his eyes began to water. And I said to myself, I'm getting him. And as we drove slowly on, and I talked with further eloquence, he gently lay his head over on my shoulder. And I knew I had him. Have you ever heard of a drunk puking silently? Every time I've ever gotten godlike with one of them, they puke on me. I can't. They have no respect whatsoever. I don't know how long you play with a drunk. I worked with one in the early days. For 4.5 years I worked with a guy. And he did not respond to treatment. I got a call one Sunday morning, and my wife took it for me. She was good about that. And she said, yes, Joe, come. And I went out and I found this dingbat. And he was as scurvy as I was when I came to AA, and he was bordering on disease. Notice that accent. And I borrowed a goblet full of whiskey from a friend of mine and poured it down him, and knocked him out, really. And when he kind of came unshuckled from this drink, he was in an AA group. I believe any way you can get him there is good, you know that. And you know, he got sober, and he stayed sober for 3 months. And then he got drunk. Didn't hurt him much. He was used to it. But it was a hell of a blow to my ego. And I said to myself, he's going to sober up under my direction, this guy is. And I went and got him again. 3 months, drunk. And this went on for 4.5 years, and I kind of made a side project out of him, you know. And he had a little affectation. I know none of you have ever done this. He'd go to faraway places and call me collect to tell me that he was drunk, you know. And I'd pray about him, you know. I said, God, you've been watching them sparrows too much. So let me have one like this. Please give me some relief, I said. 12 years ago, he got on for him what was his last drunk in one of our local motels. And he called another fellow from our group who's not half as smart as I am. And he went out and talked to that bastard 10 minutes, and he never took another drink as long as he lived. And I used to sit in the club and look at him. I hated his guts. I'd say, you ought to be mine, you know. And if I know anything of the treasure that God gives us in this Society of Alcoholics Anonymous, I owe him more than he owes me. He kept me sober for 4.5 years. I needed him more than he needed me. This is the premise upon the perpetuation of this society. So, AA don't work on attraction rather than promotion. What would have happened to us if Bill had gone outside the Mayflower Hotel that night instead of pursuing this thing and had gone and sat on the sidewalk and said, I believe I'll sit here till one comes along? You and I would have been dead had he not gone unsolicited to see the second man, and they in turn went to see the third. And so the story goes until we became quite a large number of folks. So AA's policy of survival, if you please, is visit the drunk. To me. Now, we'll go home, but I'm going to tell a little story. We have a guest here tonight, and maybe I can tell a story about the recovery of a sick man. And it didn't come out of our book. It came out of another book written about 2,000 years ago. And tell it for our guest here so that he'll be more patient the next time he sees a sick man. This has to do with a story that came out of the scripture about a fellow that they called a demoniac. And I'll have to tell it to you the way I read it, the way it appeared to me as a nut. They called him a demoniac. In those days, they didn't have any psychiatrists, you know. And for the lack of better verbiage, they called him a demoniac, maniac full of demons. That's the best, you know. If we'd have had him now, he'd have been a bedwetter or catatonic or something. But the scripture says, per se, that the manifestation of his disease, they called it in there, was such that they had to keep him in fetters and chains, like me. Said that he was so wild that no man could tame him, kind of like me. Then it went on to tell about this sick fellow and the poor nut, and it said that he got so bad that they had to run him out of town, just exactly like me. And he ended up out on the riverbank eating with the pigs. Could have been under the bridge in Sacramento. And I can see the picture with my eye. It don't take much imagination for me to see it. The vain babble, the filth, the utterances of a man who's crazy. Here he was. All intents and purposes, he was hopeless, like they say we are in AA, until we find a solution to our problem. There seemed to have been, at that time, a little carpenter fellow who was going around the country teaching a new philosophy of love. And he had a facility that we in AA have not quite acquired yet. he could see no ill in anyone. And he came upon this cat, and he said to him, "Look, bud, are you having some trouble?" And this nut, in his self-pity, if you please, said, "Trouble is my name. That's my name is Trouble. I've got so many that they call me Legion in the Scripture." And the little carpenter saw that he needed a lot of help. And he didn't say to him, like we in AA say, "Are you ready?" He effected a treatment on that man that was as little understood in those days as the treatment of Alcoholics Anonymous is understood today in some areas. It had to do with casting the spirits out of this nut into some pigs, if you remember the story at your mother's knee. And the pigs were crazed and they ran off into the sea and were drowned. And that's not the end of the story. There were some stew pigeons around, like there always is. And the stew pigeons ran into town and they told the people that owned the pigs, they said to them, "You out of the pig business." And in those days, the pig business was big business, you know. And these people were lost. They were really, it says they uses the word in there, they were terribly incensed at the loss of their pigs. And they went out en masse to see what had happened here. And when they got there, now here's the second step of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you please. There he sat, fully clothed and in his right mind. How close is that to came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity? There he sat, fully clothed and in his right mind. And these people were still mad about it. They were more upset about the material loss of their pigs than they were in the fact that one feller got well. Believe you me that the perpetuation of the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous hangs upon the premise that one man gets well. How many of you folks came in a bunch? So they prevailed upon him to leave and said to him, "Get out, get out, get out, leave here. Look what you've done to us." And I can see this little feller coming from one terrible existence of terror-striking atmosphere and not having the time to enjoy the fruits of another. And of very rare necessity, he looked at what I would call his sponsor, because he was terribly frightened and he didn't know what to do. And he said to the little carpenter, "Let me go with you." And the little carpenter broke the rules for us. Everybody that he'd ever helped up until that time, he'd said to them, "Go on, don't say anything about it. You were blind, now you see." Don't make an issue out of it. But he said to the nut, "What I will say to you, stay here so that others can see what has happened to you. Thank you so very much."